"You were a mistake I've lived with every day," he said coldly on their anniversary. He didn't bring flowers, no gift, just venom. But she didn't cry. She didn't even blink. She just smiled, calm, graceful, unshaken. And then she leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. What she said next shook him to his core. "People often ask me, why are the women in your stories always poor and helpless? Well, not this time. This time, a powerful woman reminded the world exactly what a woman can do." Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Before we begin, let me say a prayer for you, because your love and presence mean everything to me. A prayer for my beautiful family. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this beautiful family you've placed in my life. Bless every heart that listens, every soul that connects through these stories. Surround them with your peace, heal their pain, and guide their steps. Let love fill their homes, let strength carry them through their trials, and let joy never leave their hearts. May these stories continue to bring comfort, inspiration, and healing. In your holy and precious name, Amen. Now, my beautiful family, I want to share something important with you. Binta and I are traveling to New York for my medical checkup with one of the best cardiologists in the world, Dr. Bruce Lerman. Many of you already know his name. I trust he's in God's hands, and I believe everything will be all right. While we're away for the next 2 to 3 days, our beloved James will be here to present the stories. But let me remind you, the words, the passion, the message, it's still mine. So I need you to promise me one thing: never leave the story in the middle. Stay with it, feel it, live it, just like always. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Have you invited your family and friends to our channel yet? This family is growing, and it's because of you. Now let's welcome James with all the love you've given me. Keep Binta and me in your prayers. We're carrying yours in our hearts. Love.
Hi, my beautiful family. This is James. I'll be here with you for the next 2 to 3 days because our beloved Mr. Peter has traveled to New York for an important medical checkup. He'll be back in just 3 days, safe and strong. So please don't worry. I know some of you might feel a little disappointed not seeing him today, and I truly understand. But let's keep him in our prayers and surround him with love from afar. He misses you all deeply. Now, let's honor him by diving into today's beautiful story together. Monica Anderson had destroyed bigger men than Shane Tackett before breakfast, but when he smiled at her across that boardroom table, she made the most dangerous decision of her life. She chose to let him think he was the predator. The mahogany conference table stretched like a battlefield between two armies, and Monica Anderson commanded its head like a general surveying enemy territory. Her Armani suit was midnight black, tailored to perfection, and her dark eyes held the kind of razor intelligence that made Fortune 500 CEOs confess their crimes without realizing it. At 28, she was already the youngest senior partner in Blackstone, Weaver and Associates' century-long history, Washington, D.C.'s most feared legal powerhouse. "Gentlemen," Monica's voice cut through the tension like silk over steel. "You have exactly 30 seconds to explain why Tackett Industries believes it can circumvent EPA regulations through jurisdictional shell games." Across from her, Shane Tackett leaned back with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a business negotiation. 40 years old, silver threading through his dark hair, wearing a Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's annual salaries. His steel-gray eyes met hers without flinching, and when he smiled, it was the slow, dangerous expression of a wolf who'd spotted particularly challenging prey. "Ms. Anderson," Shane's voice carried whiskey-smooth confidence, "I think you'll find that Tackett Industries operates within all applicable legal frameworks. Perhaps if you focused on actual environmental law instead of courtroom theatrics, you'd understand the regulatory complexities." The temperature in the room plummeted. Monica's associates tensed. They'd watched her eviscerate Fortune 500 CEOs for lesser provocations. Senator Patricia Hartwell, seated to Monica's right, cleared her throat nervously. This was meant to be routine settlement negotiations, not warfare. But Monica didn't explode. Instead, she smiled, the same expression her great-grandfather, Judge Thaddeus Anderson, had worn while sentencing robber barons to prison during the Gilded Age. The same look her father displayed when delivering Supreme Court decisions that reshaped American law. "Mr. Tackett," Monica's voice dropped to silk, "I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law. I edited the Harvard Law Review. I've argued 14 cases before the Supreme Court and won every single one. My family has been practicing constitutional law since before your ancestors discovered what a courtroom looked like." She paused, letting each word settle like stones in still water. "So when I tell you that your company has violated federal environmental statutes in 6 states, that's not opinion. That's documented fact." Shane's smile widened. "Impressive credentials, counselor. But credentials don't win cases. Strategy does. And I've built a billion-dollar empire by understanding that everything and everyone has a price." The challenge hung in the air between them like electricity before a storm. Monica felt something stir in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine intrigue. Most men either cowered before her reputation or tried to diminish her with condescension. Shane Tackett was doing neither. He was meeting her as an equal, even though he was clearly outmatched. Is that so? Monica stood, her 5'8" frame commanding the room effortlessly. "Then let me educate you about price, Mr. Tackett. The EPA fine for your violations will be $47 million. The cost of retrofitting your plants to meet federal standards will be approximately $60 million. The civil lawsuits from affected communities will likely reach $200 million. She moved around the table slowly, like a predator circling wounded prey. "But the real price, the one you can't calculate, is your reputation. Because when I'm finished with this case, Tackett Industries will be synonymous with corporate irresponsibility." Shane tracked her movement, his eyes never leaving hers. "And what would it take to make this educational experience less expensive for all parties involved?" Monica stopped directly behind his chair, close enough to smell his cologne. Something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken despite her professional facade. This was dangerous territory. She'd built her career on being untouchable, unshakable, immune to charm. Full compliance with all EPA standards within 6 months, she said, her voice steady. A $50 million fund for environmental restoration, and a public apology acknowledging wrongdoing. Counteroffer. Shane turned in his chair to face her, and suddenly they were only inches apart. "Dinner? Tonight? Just the two of us. No lawyers, no negotiators, no corporate politics. Let me show you that there's more to Shane Tackett than you think." The room fell silent. Senator Hartwell's mouth actually fell open. This wasn't how corporate negotiations worked. This wasn't how anything worked in Monica's carefully ordered world. "Mr. Tackett," Monica's voice was ice, "this is a federal environmental case, not a dating service." "I'm not asking for a date," Shane stood, bringing them face to face. "I'm asking for a chance to show you that maybe, just maybe, we want the same things. Clean air, clean water, profitable business. The difference is, I believe we can have both." Monica studied his face, her legal mind racing through possibilities and dangers. Every instinct told her to shut this down, to maintain professional distance, to crush him in court and move on to the next case. But something in his eyes stopped her, not arrogance or manipulation, but genuine curiosity. When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen not just the legendary Monica Anderson, but simply Monica? One dinner, she heard herself say, neutral ground. And if you think charm will change the legal facts of this case, you're going to be deeply disappointed. Shane's smile this time was different, softer, more real. I wouldn't dream of it, counselor. I suspect disappointing you would be a very dangerous mistake. 3 hours later, Monica sat in Le Bernardin, trying to figure out how she'd ended up across a candlelit table from Shane Tackett instead of in her office preparing to destroy him. She'd changed from her courtroom armor into a sapphire blue dress that brought out her eyes, telling herself it was just professional courtesy. So, Shane said, swirling his wineglass, tell me about the real Monica Anderson, the one who decided to become a lawyer instead of following her family into politics. Who says I didn't follow my family into politics? Monica raised an eyebrow. Law is politics, Mr. Tackett. The only difference is that in law, the rules are written down. Shane, he corrected, and somehow I doubt your story is that simple. Harvard Law Review editors don't usually end up prosecuting environmental cases unless there's passion behind it. Monica hesitated. She rarely talked about personal motivations with anyone, let alone opposing counsel. But something about the way Shane listened, completely focused, without judgment, made her want to share. I grew up spending summers at my grandmother's house in Louisiana, she said finally. Bayou country. When I was 12, a chemical plant upstream had an accident, killed everything in the water for miles. My grandmother's garden, where she'd grown vegetables for 40 years, became toxic overnight. Monica's voice softened with memory. She died 2 years later. Cancer. The plant settled out of court for $30,000. They valued my grandmother's life at $30,000. Shane was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its earlier playfulness. I'm sorry, that's unconscionable. It was legal, Monica said simply. That's when I learned the difference between what's legal and what's right, and I decided to spend my life making sure they were the same thing. Even if it means going after people like me. Monica met his eyes directly. Especially people like you. You have the power to do better, Shane. The question is whether you have the will. The dinner stretched into hours. They talked about everything: law, business, family, dreams. Shane told her about building his company from nothing after his father's empire collapsed in scandal. Monica shared her vision of using law to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. By the time they left the restaurant, something had shifted between them. This doesn't change anything legally, Monica said as they stood on the sidewalk, the DC night alive around them. I know, Shane replied, but maybe it changes everything else. 6 months later, Monica Anderson shocked the legal world by stepping back from active practice to become Mrs. Shane Tackett. The environmental case was settled. Shane's company paid the fines, implemented the changes, and actually became a model for sustainable industry practices. Monica told herself she was making a greater impact by influencing Shane directly than she ever could from a courtroom. What she didn't realize was that in choosing love, she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Not marrying Shane Tackett, but forgetting who Monica Anderson really was. Chapter 2. The Caged Eagle. 5 years of marriage had taught Monica Anderson Tackett that there were worse fates than losing your freedom, like forgetting you ever possessed it. Crystal light from the dining room chandelier cast dancing shadows across Monica's face as she perfected the seating chart for their anniversary celebration. Senators, Supreme Court justices, Fortune 500 CEOs, all gathering to toast Tackett Industries' 5th consecutive year of record profits. Shane's victories, Shane's empire, Shane's legacy. Monica's manicured finger traced down the guest list, pausing at names that once would have returned her calls within minutes. Justice Walker Ironbridge, her former mentor, now relegated to distinguished guest status. Senator Rain Anderson Skyfield, her own sister, who would make polite conversation about charity galas and interior design. Judge Canyon Bluestone, her Harvard law roommate, who'd stopped calling because you're always managing Shane's calendar. Mrs. Tackett. The voice belonged to Celeste, their house manager, a efficient woman in her 50s who ran their Potomac estate with military precision. The caterers are asking about wine pairings for the fish course. Monica looked up from her notes, momentarily disoriented. Mrs. Tackett. 5 years later, the name still felt like wearing someone else's identity. The 2015 Sancerre, she replied automatically, and ensure they remember Justice Ironbridge's shellfish allergy. Of course, ma'am, Celeste hesitated. Perhaps you should review Mr. Tackett's prepared remarks for tonight. He's announcing the Beijing expansion. Monica's pen froze mid-stroke. Beijing expansion? The new manufacturing facility. The board approved it yesterday. Celeste's tone remained diplomatically neutral, but Monica caught the underlying message. Once again, Shane had made major corporate decisions without consulting his wife. His wife, who happened to possess one of America's most brilliant legal minds. Thank you, Celeste. I'll speak with him. But even as the words left her lips, Monica knew she wouldn't. The last time she'd questioned Shane's business strategy, the dubious partnership with Meridian Holdings, he'd smiled that patronizing expression and said, "Sweetheart, focus on the charity work. Leave actual business to people who understand it." Actual business, as if she hadn't spent years prosecuting executives who thought they understood business while systematically violating federal law. Monica rose from the mahogany dining table and moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking their manicured gardens. The Potomac River sparkled in afternoon sunlight, and beyond it, the D.C. skyline where she'd once dominated courtrooms and influenced policy, where Monica Anderson had wielded real power. Her reflection stared back at her from the window, still beautiful at 33, her dark skin flawless. Her hair styled in the soft waves Shane preferred, instead of the sharp chignon she'd worn in court. The woman in the reflection wore Oscar de la Renta instead of Armani, pearls instead of power suits. She looked successful, pampered, content. She looked like a stranger. Monica's phone buzzed. A text from Shane. "Don't wait up. Last-minute client dinner. You understand." She did understand. She understood that last-minute client dinner increasingly meant dinner with Wisteria Moonridge, the elegant blonde who'd preceded Monica as Shane's arm candy. Wisteria, who'd been conveniently hired as Tackett Industries' strategic communications consultant 6 months ago. Wisteria, who laughed at Shane's jokes with the breathless admiration of someone who'd never torn apart a Fortune 500 CEO's legal arguments in open court. Monica set down her phone and picked up the folder marked Beijing Expansion, Confidential. She shouldn't look. Wives didn't review their husbands' confidential business documents, but lawyers did. The contract made her blood run cold. Environmental assessments glossed over, labor standards that barely met minimum requirements, partnerships with companies she recognized from her prosecutorial days. Companies with histories of human rights violations and environmental disasters. This was exactly the kind of deal that had brought Shane to her attention 5 years ago, the kind of deal that had made her fall in love with him when he'd promised to do better, the kind of deal he was making again, apparently confident that his loving wife would never notice or never care enough to object. Monica's hands shook as she read deeper into the documents. Payoffs disguised as consulting fees, environmental impact studies with suspicious gaps, a timeline that suggested Shane had been planning this for months while she'd been planning dinner parties and charity galas. "Mrs. Tackett," Celeste appeared in the doorway. "Your sister is here." Rain Anderson Skyfield swept into the room like a force of nature, her senatorial bearing intact even in casual clothes. 2 years older than Monica, Rain had followed their father into politics and never looked back. She'd won her Senate seat at 35 and was already being mentioned as presidential material. "My God, Monica," Rain said, embracing her sister. "You look beautiful. Marriage suits you." The lie sat between them like acid. Rain's trained political eye saw everything. The tension in Monica's shoulders, the carefully concealed exhaustion, the way Monica's hands trembled slightly as she closed the Beijing folder. "How are you, Rain?" "Really?" Monica poured 2 glasses of wine from the bottle she'd been saving for tonight's celebration. "Busy. The Environmental Protection Committee is investigating some concerning reports about American companies' overseas operations." Rain's voice was casual, but her eyes were sharp. Companies taking advantage of lax environmental standards in developing countries. It's exactly the kind of corporate irresponsibility you use to prosecute. Monica's wineglass paused halfway to her lips. "Used to." Monica. Rain sat down across from her sister, abandoning political niceties. "Do you remember what you told me when you decided to marry Shane? You said you could do more good as his partner than as his prosecutor. You said love would make him better." "It did make him better." But Monica's voice lacked conviction. "Did it? Or did it just make him better at hiding who he really was?" Before Monica could answer, the sound of Shane's Mercedes echoed from the circular driveway. He was home early from his client dinner, probably because Wisteria had other plans. Shane entered the sitting room like he owned the world, which, Monica reflected, he essentially did. At 45, success had only made him more attractive, more confident, more commanding, more certain of his place at the center of the universe. "Rain." Shane's smile was genuine as he kissed his sister-in-law's cheek. "What brings you to our humble estate?" "Family dinner," Rain replied smoothly, "though I suspect you've eaten already." Shane loosened his tie, a gesture that once would have made Monica's pulse quicken. Now it just reminded her of all the evenings he'd come home late, smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. Business dinner ran long. You know how it is. Shane poured himself a scotch from the crystal decanter, not offering any to the women. "Monica, we need to talk about tonight's guest list. I'm thinking we should seat Justice Morrison next to the Attorney General. Good optics." "Shane," Monica's voice was quiet but firm, "I saw the Beijing contracts." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Rain's political instincts kicked in. She could practically smell the danger in the room. Shane's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Those are confidential business documents, Monica." "I'm your wife." "You're my wife, not my business partner." Shane's voice carried a warning. "I thought we'd establish the boundaries of your involvement in Tackett Industries." Rain stood abruptly. "I should go. Monica, we'll talk soon." She kissed her sister's cheek and whispered, too low for Shane to hear, "Remember who you are." After Rain left, Shane approached Monica with the careful steps of a man navigating a minefield. "Sweetheart, I know the Beijing deal looks complicated, but you don't understand the full picture. International business requires compromises that someone with your idealistic background might find troubling." Idealistic. The word hit Monica like a slap. "My idealistic background. You mean my legal background? My prosecutorial experience? My understanding of federal law? Your background in prosecuting American companies for trying to compete globally." Shane's tone was patient, condescending. "The world has changed, Monica. Business has changed. You can't apply domestic legal standards to international operations." Monica felt something snap inside her chest, a wire that had been stretched taut for 5 years finally breaking. "You're right, Shane. I can't apply legal standards because I'm not a lawyer anymore, am I? I'm just your wife. Your beautiful, accomplished, conveniently neutered wife who smiles at your dinner parties and doesn't ask inconvenient questions about your business practices. Shane's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Monica, you're being dramatic. This is exactly why I don't discuss business with you. You always make it personal. Personal? Monica stood, her full height making her nearly eye level with Shane. My entire career was built on stopping exactly the kind of environmental and human rights abuses that are outlined in those contracts. You knew that when you married me. You promised that would never change. I promised I would consider your input. I never promised to let you run my company. The words hung in the air like poison. Let her. As if her opinions were a favor he granted, rather than insights from one of the most respected legal minds in America. Your company, Monica repeated softly. Of course. How silly of me to think we were partners. Shane's expression softened and he reached for her hands. We are partners, sweetheart, in everything that matters. But Tackett Industries was my father's legacy, my life's work. I built it from nothing. With my help, Monica's voice was steel. With my connections, my legal expertise, my family's political influence. Or did you forget how many regulatory problems mysteriously disappeared after Senator Anderson Skyfield made some phone calls? Shane's jaw tightened. I never asked you to make those calls. You didn't have to ask. I did it because I loved you, because I believed in us. Monica pulled her hands free. But that was before I realized you saw my love as weakness instead of strength. Monica, the Beijing expansion is a mistake, Shane. Those partnerships will expose Tackett Industries to criminal liability. The environmental violations alone could result in federal charges. If you proceed with this deal, you'll destroy everything you've built. Shane's expression hardened completely. Thank you for your opinion, counselor. I'll give it all the consideration it deserves. The dismissal was complete and cutting. Monica felt the last vestiges of her old self stirring. The prosecutor who'd never backed down from a fight. The woman who'd built her reputation on being right when everyone else was wrong. Then I suppose we have nothing more to discuss, Monica said quietly. I'll be ready for tonight's dinner party. After all, that's what I'm good for now. As Shane left the room, Monica walked back to the window overlooking the Potomac. In the distance, the lights of D.C. beckoned like stars from a former life. Somewhere in that city, there were courtrooms where justice still mattered, law firms where brilliance was valued over beauty, cases that could change the world. Somewhere in that city, Monica Anderson still existed. She just had to remember how to find her. Chapter 3. The Lioness Remembers Her Roar. Hell hath no fury like a brilliant woman who's finally exhausted her patience with playing small. The Tackett estate blazed with light as Washington's elite gathered to celebrate 5 years of Shane's unprecedented success. Monica stood at the marble staircase's apex, surveying the glittering assembly below, feeling like Marie Antoinette moments before the guillotine. Her anniversary gown was midnight blue silk that accentuated every curve, with diamonds at her throat catching light like captured starfire. She embodied perfection as a billionaire's wife. She felt like a masterful performance of someone else's life. Ladies and gentlemen, Shane's voice commanded the ballroom's attention, cutting through conversation with practiced authority. He stood beside the champagne fountain, resplendent in custom black tie, radiating the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place atop the world. Before we continue our celebration, I want to acknowledge the woman who made all this possible. Monica's stomach dropped. Please, she thought desperately, not tonight, not in front of everyone. My beautiful wife, Monica, Shane continued, raising his crystal flute toward her. The woman who sacrificed everything to support my vision, who transformed from a competent lawyer into the perfect corporate wife. Competent. The word struck Monica like a physical blow. Polite laughter rippled through the ballroom. Justice Walker Ironbridge appeared uncomfortable. Senator Rain Anderson Skyfield's expression turned glacial. But most guests nodded approvingly. What greater achievement could a woman claim than abandoning her career for her husband's dreams? Monica descended the staircase slowly, her smile flawlessly maintained even as her heart fractured with each step. Competent. 5 years of marriage, and that's how Shane characterized her legal career. The career that had made her the youngest partner in firm history, that had influenced environmental law across 3 presidential administrations, that had imprisoned corrupt corporate executives. Darling, Shane took her hand as she reached the ballroom floor, his touch possessive rather than affectionate. I was just explaining how you've discovered your true calling in philanthropic work and supporting my enterprises. How lovely. Monica's voice flowed like silk over steel. Though I'd hardly call prosecuting environmental criminals competent, unless you're comparing it to more intellectually demanding work. Shane's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course not, sweetheart, but you have to admit, what you're doing now suits you so much better. All that courtroom drama was so aggressive for someone like you. Someone like you. Monica felt the familiar fire beginning to kindle in her chest, the same fire that had once reduced Fortune 500 CEOs to stammering apologies. But she kept her smile in place, playing the part of the adoring wife just a little longer. You're absolutely right, darling, Monica said, her voice carrying just enough volume for nearby guests to hear. After all, why would I want to prosecute corporate criminals when I could plan dinner parties instead? The conversation around them faltered slightly. Justice Ironbridge stepped closer, his weathered face creased with concern. Monica, how are you? I was hoping we might catch up later about the Environmental Protection Committee, Shane interrupted smoothly. I'm afraid Monica doesn't follow those tedious legal matters anymore. Do you, sweetheart? We found it's better to leave the thinking to the professionals. The temperature in Monica's smile dropped several degrees. Around them, the party continued, but she was aware of a growing circle of attention. DCS elite had a sixth sense for drama, and blood was about to spill. Actually, Monica said, her voice still honey-sweet, I was following the committee's investigation into American companies conducting illegal operations overseas, particularly companies that might be violating environmental and human rights laws in developing countries. Shane's hand tightened on hers, his fingers digging into her palm. Monica, you're boring our guests with shop talk. Am I? Monica turned to face Justice Ironbridge directly. Justice, didn't you once tell me that the most dangerous criminal is the one who believes his wealth makes him untouchable? I did indeed, Ironbridge replied carefully, his eyes moving between Monica and Shane with growing interest. How fascinating, Monica continued, her tone conversational. I was just reading about a company planning to build manufacturing facilities in Beijing, using partnerships with firms that have documented histories of environmental violations and human rights abuses. The kind of partnerships that would expose American executives to criminal liability under international law. Shane's face had gone pale beneath his tan. Monica, this isn't the time or place. Isn't it? Monica finally turned to face her husband fully, and everyone within earshot could see the fire blazing in her dark eyes. When exactly is the right time to discuss corporate responsibility, Shane? When the indictments are handed down. The circle of listeners had grown larger. Conversations throughout the ballroom were dying as people strained to hear what was happening near the champagne fountain. Attorney General Harrison Mills had moved closer, his expression professionally neutral but intensely interested. Perhaps, Shane's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. We should discuss this privately. Privacy, Monica mused, as if considering the concept for the first time. Yes, we've certainly been private about a lot of things, haven't we? Your business practices, your late-night client dinners, your opinion of my intellectual capabilities. Monica. Shane's voice carried a clear warning, but Monica was beyond caring about warnings. Tell me, darling, Monica continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, when you describe my legal career as adequate to your friends, do you mention that I never lost a case? That I rewrote environmental enforcement policy? That Fortune 500 CEOs used to cross the street to avoid me? The ballroom had gone completely silent now. 300 of Washington's most powerful people were witnessing what was clearly more than a marital spat. This was a public destruction, and everyone could sense it. Shane leaned closer to Monica, his voice dropping to a furious whisper that still carried to the nearby guests. That's enough. You're embarrassing yourself. Embarrassing myself? Monica's laugh was like broken crystal. Shane, I've spent 5 years embarrassing myself. 5 years pretending to be less intelligent, less capable, less everything than I actually am. 5 years smiling while you dismissed me, condescended to me, and treated me like an ornament rather than a partner. You are my partner, Shane hissed. In marriage, that should be enough for any woman. Any woman. Monica repeated the words slowly as if tasting poison. But not this woman. This woman has a law degree from Harvard. This woman has prosecuted cases before the Supreme Court. This woman has shaped federal policy and put criminals behind bars. This woman was never meant to be a decoration in your mansion. The crowd pressed closer, sensing the approaching climax. Monica could see her sister Rain pushing through the throng, her face a mask of concern and growing anger. Justice Ironbridge looked as if he wanted to intervene, but Attorney General Mills placed a restraining hand on his arm. This was something that needed to play out. Shane's mask was disintegrating now, revealing the cold calculation beneath his polished exterior. You're having some kind of breakdown, Monica. Anniversary stress, too much champagne. The only thing I'm breaking down is the pretense I've maintained for 5 years, Monica interrupted, her voice projecting clearly across the silent ballroom. The pretense that convinced me I could love you into becoming a decent man. The pretense that made me believe supporting your empire mattered more than upholding justice. Monica, you're being hysterical. Hysterical. The word detonated between them like a grenade. Hysterical? Monica's voice rose to courtroom projection, trained to command authority in the largest venues. Every person in the ballroom heard her with crystal clarity. I am many things, Shane Tackett, but hysterical isn't one of them. I am furious. I am disappointed. I am devastated that I wasted 5 years of my life on a man who sees brilliance as a threat rather than a gift. But I am not hysterical. Shane's face flushed red with humiliation and rage. The careful control he'd maintained throughout his public life was cracking under the pressure of Monica's assault. You want to know what I really think? Shane's voice was shaking with fury. Fine. I've hated you since the day we married. You with your superior attitude, your constant judgment, your need to be right about everything. Marrying you was the biggest mistake of my life. The words exploded across the ballroom like artillery fire. Gasps echoed from the crowd. Several women pressed hands to their mouths in shock. Attorney General Mills looked as if he were witnessing a fatal car accident. But Monica didn't flinch. Instead, something extraordinary happened. For the first time in 5 years, Monica Anderson smiled her real smile, not the practiced diplomatic expression of Mrs. Shane Tackett, but the dangerous, predatory smile of the prosecutor who had never lost a case. Well, Monica said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in 5 years. She stepped closer to Shane, close enough that only he could hear her next words, though the entire ballroom strained to listen. Shane Tackett, Monica whispered, her voice like silk over steel. You have no idea who you just declared war on. You're about to discover what happens when you try to cage an apex predator. You have 30 days to learn exactly who Monica Anderson really is, and then you'll spend the rest of your life trying to earn what you just threw away. Monica turned to face the stunned crowd, her head high, her smile radiant. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for what has been a truly illuminating anniversary celebration. I hope you'll excuse me. I have some very important calls to make. She walked through the crowd like a queen passing through her subjects. People stepped aside automatically, some in shock, others in what looked suspiciously like admiration. As she reached the entrance to the ballroom, Monica paused and looked back one final time. Shane stood frozen by the champagne fountain, his face a mask of rage and dawning realization. Around him, 300 of Washington's most powerful people buzzed with excitement and speculation. By tomorrow, the story of the Tackett anniversary disaster would be the talk of every law firm, congressional office, and boardroom in the city. Oh, and Shane, Monica called across the ballroom, her voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. You might want to have your lawyers review those Beijing contracts very carefully. I have a feeling they're about to become very relevant to your future. Monica Anderson walked out of her husband's mansion and into the D.C. night, leaving behind 5 years of suffocating perfection. Behind her, the party dissolved into chaos as guests rushed to spread the news of what they'd witnessed. The sleeping lioness had finally awakened, and she was hungry. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. Monica Anderson had spent 5 years documenting her husband's federal crimes from their breakfast table. Now it was time to present him with the bill. The law offices of Goldwater, Blackstone, and Associates occupied the Jefferson Building's top 15 floors, with floor-to-ceiling windows commanding views of the Supreme Court, Capitol, and White House. Monica stood in the corner office that had once been hers, watching sunrise paint Washington, D.C. in shades of gold and possibility. For the first time in 5 years, she wore her battle armor. The Armani suit was charcoal gray, tailored for intimidation. Her hair was pulled into the severe chignon that had once terrorized Fortune 500 CEOs. The Monica Anderson emerging from the Tackett mansion 12 hours earlier bore no resemblance to the diplomatic wife who'd entered it that morning. I have to admit, Timber Goldwater said from behind his massive oak desk, when your assistant called at 3 a.m. requesting partnership discussions, I thought she'd been drinking. Timber had been Monica's law school rival, then colleague, finally her closest professional competitor. Tall, silver-haired, possessed of a legal mind that could dissect constitutional law like a surgeon with a scalpel, he'd built one of D.C.'s most feared prosecution practices after Monica abandoned the field. I was never drunk, Timber, merely temporarily delusional. Monica turned from the window, her dark eyes holding the glacial fire that had once made her legendary. Temporarily convinced that love could rehabilitate a career criminal. I've recovered. Timber's laugh carried sharp understanding. So the rumors are accurate? Shane Tackett is about to discover what happens when you discard the finest legal mind of our generation. Shane Tackett is about to discover what happens when you underestimate Monica Anderson. Monica moved to the chair across from Timber's desk, settling into it with the grace of a predator claiming territory. I assume you're still representing the Environmental Protection Agency in their investigation of overseas operations, among others. Timber's expression grew thoughtful. The EPA, the State Department, the International Criminal Court. It's been a very busy year for American companies with questionable foreign partnerships. Monica smiled, and Timber felt a chill of recognition. That smile had preceded the destruction of some of the most powerful men in America. I have information, Monica said simply, about an American steel company planning to enter into partnerships with firms that have documented histories of environmental crimes and human rights violations. Partnerships that would expose the American company's executives to criminal liability under international law. How interesting. Timber leaned back in his chair, studying Monica's face. And what would you want in exchange for this information? I want back in, Timber. Full partnership. My old office, my old cases. And I want to personally prosecute every executive involved in environmental crimes and corporate malfeasance. Even if one of those executives happens to be your husband. Monica's smile turned predatory. Especially if one of those executives happens to be my husband. Timber was quiet for a long moment, studying the woman across from his desk. 5 years ago, Monica Anderson had been the most feared prosecutor in Washington. She'd rewritten environmental law, destroyed corporate empires, and sent CEOs to federal prison with surgical precision. Her defection to marriage had left a void in the legal world that no one had quite been able to fill. There's the small matter of conflict of interest, Timber said finally. You can't prosecute your own husband. I can if I'm not his wife anymore. Monica reached into her briefcase and withdrew a thick legal document. Divorce papers, filed at 6 this morning. Irreconcilable differences, with a detailed addendum outlining Shane's business practices that I can no longer, in good conscience, support. Timber took the papers, scanning them with a professional eye. This is comprehensive, property division, spousal support waiver, complete financial disclosure. He looked up sharply. Monica, you're walking away from everything. The house, the assets, the lifestyle. Why? Because I'd rather be poor and honest than rich and complicit. Monica's voice was steel. I've spent 5 years watching Shane build his empire on the backs of environmental destruction and human rights violations. I documented everything, Timber. Every contract, every payoff, every consulting fee, to silence environmental groups. I have enough evidence to bring down not just Shane, but half the executives he does business with. Timber set down the divorce papers and leaned forward, his expression intense. You're talking about prosecuting one of the most powerful men in American industry. Shane Tackett has connections in Congress, the White House, the Supreme Court. He'll use every resource at his disposal to destroy you. Let him try. Monica's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never lost a legal battle. Shane made one crucial mistake, Timber. He thinks I'm the same woman who married him 5 years ago. He thinks I'm the woman who chose love over justice, who valued marriage over integrity. He has no idea what he's awakened. Monica stood and walked to the window wall, looking out over the city where she'd once commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Below, morning traffic moved through streets where she'd once been a force of nature, where her name on a case file could make executives abandon illegal schemes before she'd even filed charges. Do you know what Shane called my legal career last night? Monica asked without turning around. Adequate. In front of 300 people, including Justice Ironbridge and Attorney General Mills, he called the career that shaped environmental law in this country adequate. I heard. Timber's voice was grim. Word travels fast in legal circles. Half the prosecutors in the city are ready to volunteer for whatever case you're building. Monica turned back to face him, and Timber saw something in her expression that made him understand why Fortune 500 CEOs had once crossed streets to avoid her. This wasn't just professional ambition or legal strategy. This was personal vengeance wrapped in the cloak of justice. I want the Beijing case, Timber. Shane's partnerships with Meridian Holdings, Dragon Steel Corporation, and Chen Industrial Group. I want to prosecute every American executive involved in those deals for environmental crimes, human rights violations, and international corruption. That's not a case, Monica. That's a war. Good. Monica's smile was razor sharp. I've been playing defense for 5 years. It's time to remind Washington why I never lost on offense. Timber was quiet for several minutes, weighing possibilities and consequences. Finally, he nodded slowly. Full partnership. Your old office. Complete autonomy on prosecution strategy. But Monica, once we file these charges, there's no going back. You'll be declaring war on one of the most powerful men in America. I declared war last night, Monica replied calmly. I'm just choosing the battlefield now. By noon, the news had exploded across legal and business circles. Monica Anderson was back. The legendary prosecutor who'd disappeared into marriage 5 years ago had returned to the law with a vengeance, and her first target was her own husband's company. Shane's reaction came in the form of a phone call that went straight to voicemail. Monica listened to his message from her restored corner office, watching FBI agents enter the Tackett Industries building across the street. Monica, what the hell do you think you're doing? You can't just walk away from our marriage because you had a bad night. Call me. We can work this out. You're being emotional and irrational, and you're going to destroy both our lives over a misunderstanding. Monica deleted the message without a second thought. Emotional and irrational. Even facing the destruction of his empire, Shane still couldn't see her as anything more than a hysterical woman having a breakdown. The second message came an hour later, after news of the FBI raids had reached Shane. Monica, you need to stop this right now. You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing. I have lawyers, connections, resources you can't imagine. If you think you can destroy me, you're making the biggest mistake of your life. Threats now, Monica almost laughed. Shane still believed he was dealing with his malleable wife rather than the prosecutor who'd built her reputation on destroying men who thought they were untouchable. The third message arrived as Monica was reviewing evidence files with her new team of federal prosecutors. You bitch! You think you're so smart, so superior. I made you. I gave you everything. Without me, you're nothing. When I'm done with you, you'll never practice law in this country again. There it was, the real Shane Tackett, stripped of charm and pretense. Monica saved this message knowing it would be useful in court when Shane's lawyers tried to paint him as a loving husband, betrayed by his unstable wife. Mrs. Anderson. The voice belonged to FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who specialized in corporate crimes. We've completed the initial sweep of Tackett Industries. Your documentation was remarkably thorough. Monica looked up from the Beijing contracts she'd been reviewing. How thorough? Thorough enough that we're recommending immediate asset freezing and congressional investigation. The partnerships with Meridian Holdings alone involve at least 40 separate federal violations. The environmental damage projections are staggering. And Shane's personal liability? Agent Chen's expression grew grim. If even half of these documents are authentic, Shane Tackett is looking at 30 years in federal prison. Minimum. Monica felt something settle in her chest. Not satisfaction, exactly, but the cold certainty of justice finally being served. For 5 years, she'd watched Shane build his empire on the ruins of environmental protection and human rights. She told herself she was working from within, influencing him toward better choices. She'd been lying to herself. Agent Chen, Monica said, her voice carrying the authority that had once made her the most feared prosecutor in Washington. I want you to understand something. This investigation is not about my marriage or my personal grievances against Shane Tackett. This is about holding powerful men accountable for crimes they thought their wealth and connections made them untouchable for. Understood, ma'am. Good. Because Shane Tackett is about to learn the difference between Monica Anderson, the wife, and Monica Anderson, the prosecutor. And I promise you, Agent Chen, he is not going to like the lesson. As the FBI agent left her office, Monica turned back to the window overlooking the city. Across the street, she could see Shane's building, where federal agents were systematically dismantling the empire he'd built on corruption and environmental destruction. 5 years ago, Monica Anderson had chosen love over justice. She'd believed that marriage could reform a criminal, that influence could substitute for prosecution. She'd been wrong. But Monica Anderson had never made the same mistake twice. Shane Tackett was about to discover that the woman he'd dismissed as adequate was about to become his worst nightmare. And unlike their marriage, this was one battle Monica intended to win. Chapter 5. The Queen's Court. Power isn't measured by your business card title. It's determined by whose phone calls get answered first, and Monica Anderson's calls had never gone unreturned. The Russell Senate office building's marble corridors echoed with Monica's heels as she approached the chamber where her sister wielded influence. 3 days had passed since FBI raids, and Washington buzzed with speculation about the Tackett Industries investigation's scope. What they didn't realize was that Monica had spent those days activating a network of connections most people assumed had withered with her legal career. They were catastrophically wrong. Monica! Senator Rain Anderson Skyfield rose from behind her mahogany desk as her sister entered. At 35, Rain had become one of the Environmental Protection Committee's most formidable voices, with a reputation for thoroughness that made corporate executives break into nervous sweats. I've been anticipating this conversation for 5 years. Monica settled into the leather chair across from her sister's desk, noting familiar family photographs, sharing space with images of Rain meeting world leaders. The Anderson family had been influencing American politics for 4 generations, and Rain had inherited both their strategic brilliance and their unwavering commitment to justice. I assume you've seen news coverage of Shane's legal difficulties, Monica said, her tone carefully measured. Rain's laugh carried both bitterness and relief. Legal difficulties? Monica, half of Capitol Hill, is discussing nothing else. Shane Tackett's empire is collapsing, and everyone recognizes you're wielding the sledgehammer. I'm simply providing evidence of criminal activity to appropriate authorities. Stop. Rain's voice sharpened. Don't give me the professional prosecutor performance, Monica. This is Rain you're addressing. I understand exactly what you're accomplishing, and you have the Environmental Protection Committee's complete support. Monica raised an eyebrow. The committee hasn't even seen the evidence yet. We don't need to see it to know it's damning. You documented everything, didn't you? 5 years of watching Shane break federal law while you played the perfect wife, keeping records like the brilliant legal mind you've always been. Rain moved to the window overlooking the Capitol, her posture radiating the confidence that had made her a rising star in Democratic politics. Do you know what the hardest part of the last 5 years has been for me? Watching my brilliant sister, the woman who taught me that justice matters more than comfort, pretend to be something she wasn't. I thought I could change him from the inside, Monica said quietly. I thought love would make him better. Love doesn't reform criminals, Monica. Prosecution does. Rain turned back to face her sister. But that's over now. Tell me what you need. Monica reached into her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder marked Congressional Investigation, Tackett Industries. I need hearings. Public televised hearings that will expose not just Shane's crimes, but the entire network of American companies using overseas partnerships to avoid environmental and human rights regulations. Rain took the folder, scanning its contents with growing amazement. This is comprehensive doesn't begin to cover it. Monica, This evidence could bring down a dozen major corporations. That's the idea. You realize Shane won't go down quietly. He has friends in Congress, donors who depend on his contributions, lobbyists who'll fight this investigation with everything they have. Monica's smile was cold as winter. Let them try. Shane made the mistake of thinking my family's political connections disappeared when I got married. He's about to learn otherwise. As if summoned by her words, Rain's assistant knocked on the door. Senator, Justice Ironbridge is here to see Ms. Anderson. Walker Ironbridge entered the office with the bearing of a man who'd spent 30 years shaping American law from the highest court in the land. Tall, distinguished, with silver hair and eyes that had seen every kind of legal argument imaginable. He'd been Monica's mentor during her early career and had watched her disappearance from legal practice with deep regret. "Monica," he said, his voice carrying warmth tinged with relief. "When I heard you were back, I had to see for myself if the rumors were true." "Justice Ironbridge," Monica stood to embrace her former mentor. "I hope you'll forgive my dramatic exit from legal practice." "Nothing to forgive. But I have to ask, are you prepared for what's coming? Shane Tackett has friends in high places, and they'll use every resource to protect him." Monica's expression hardened. "Justice, with respect, Shane Tackett's friends in high places are about to discover that my friends sit higher." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Rain and Justice Ironbridge exchanged glances, recognizing the tone that had once preceded the destruction of some of America's most powerful criminals. "Speaking of friends," Justice Ironbridge said carefully, "I had a very interesting conversation yesterday with Attorney General Mills. It seems the Department of Justice is preparing to file federal charges against Tackett Industries. The scope is unprecedented." "How unprecedented?" Monica asked. "RICO charges, international corruption, environmental terrorism, human rights violations. If these charges stick, Shane could be looking at life in prison." Rain whistled softly. "Monica, you've built a case that could redefine corporate accountability in America." "I've built a case that should have been built 5 years ago," Monica corrected. "Shane's crimes aren't new, Rain. They're just finally being prosecuted by someone who isn't afraid of his wealth and connections." Justice Ironbridge studied Monica's face with the intensity that had made him legendary during his prosecutorial career. "There's something else you should know. The president has been briefed on the investigation. The international implications are significant. China is threatening trade retaliation if we prosecute American companies for crimes committed by their partners." "Let them threaten," Monica said calmly. "American law applies to American companies, regardless of where they choose to commit their crimes." "Monica," Rain's voice carried a note of warning. "You're talking about standing up to pressure from the White House, Congress, and international governments. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" Monica was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Then she smiled, and both Rain and Justice Ironbridge felt a chill of recognition. That smile had preceded some of the most devastating legal victories in recent memory. 5 years ago, I chose to step back from legal practice because I thought I could accomplish more through influence than through prosecution. I was wrong, but that mistake taught me something valuable about power, about justice, and about myself. Monica stood and walked to Rain's window, looking out over the Capitol where laws were made and broken, where justice was either served or sold to the highest bidder. "Shane thinks he can pressure me by threatening my career, my reputation, my future. He doesn't understand that I gave up everything that mattered to me 5 years ago when I chose marriage over justice. He can't threaten to take away what I've already sacrificed." She turned back to face Rain and Justice Ironbridge, her expression fierce with conviction. "But more than that, Shane has made the fundamental mistake of underestimating who I am and where I come from. He sees Monica Tackett, the diplomatic wife who smiled at his dinner parties and organized his social calendar. He doesn't see Monica Anderson, daughter of Supreme Court Justice Thomas Anderson, sister of Senator Rain Anderson Skyfield, mentee of Justice Walker Ironbridge. Monica's voice grew stronger with each word, carrying the authority that had once made her the most feared prosecutor in Washington. He doesn't see the woman who has attorneys general and Supreme Court justices on speed dial, who can call congressional leaders by their first names, whose family has been shaping American law for 4 generations. He sees a trophy wife having a breakdown. He doesn't see the apex predator who's been studying his weaknesses for 5 years. Justice Ironbridge nodded slowly. And now that predator is free to hunt. Exactly. Monica returned to her chair, her posture radiating confidence. Shane wanted a war, Justice. He's going to get one. But it won't be fought in the press or through social pressure. It will be fought in courtrooms and congressional chambers, with evidence and law and the full weight of American justice. Rain leaned forward, her expression intense. What do you need from us? Congressional hearings, as I said, but also coordination with international law enforcement. Shane's crimes cross borders, involve foreign governments, impact international relations. This can't be just a domestic prosecution. Done, Rain said immediately. I'll have the committee schedule hearings within the week. Justice Ironbridge nodded agreement. And I'll ensure that the international legal community understands the significance of this case. Environmental crimes and human rights violations can't be ignored simply because they're committed by wealthy Americans in foreign countries. Monica felt something settle in her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced years ago when she'd realized she had the evidence and support necessary to bring down seemingly untouchable criminals. It was the feeling of justice finally being within reach. There's one more thing, Monica said, her voice dropping to the tone she'd once used to deliver devastating cross-examinations. Shane's going to try to paint this as a vengeful ex-wife using the legal system for personal revenge. He'll claim I'm emotionally unstable, that I'm abusing my connections to settle marital grievances. How do we counter that narrative? Rain asked. Monica's smile was predatory. By letting the evidence speak for itself. Shane's crimes are documented, witnessed, provable in court. When the public sees the scope of his environmental destruction and human rights violations, they'll understand that this isn't about our marriage. This is about holding powerful men accountable for believing they're above the law. As if on cue, Monica's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and her smile widened. "What is it?" Justice Ironbridge asked. "A message from Attorney General Mills. The grand jury has voted to indict Shane on 47 federal charges. The arrest warrant will be issued tomorrow morning." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Rain and Justice Ironbridge looked at Monica with something approaching awe. In less than a week, she'd gone from trophy wife to the architect of one of the most significant corporate prosecutions in American history. "Monica," Rain said quietly, "you realize there's no going back from this? Once Shane is arrested, you'll be the woman who brought down one of America's most powerful businessmen." "Good," Monica replied, her voice carrying the steel that had once made her legendary. "It's time Washington remembered what happens when you try to cage a predator." Monica Anderson was no longer hiding her claws. Shane Tackett was about to discover just how sharp they'd become. Chapter 6. The Emperor's New Clothes. There's nothing quite like handcuffs to demonstrate the difference between genuine power and its mere illusion. Shane Tackett's arrest occurred at precisely 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning as he exited his Mercedes in Tackett Industries' executive parking garage. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen had choreographed the timing perfectly. early enough to avoid news cameras, late enough to ensure maximum humiliation among his employees. Shane Tackett, Agent Chen's voice reverberated off concrete walls. You're under arrest for conspiracy to violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, environmental terrorism, racketeering, and 44 additional federal charges. Handcuffs clicked shut with a sound that seemed to echo through Shane's disintegrating world. Around him, employees who'd once scrambled to fulfill his every demand now stood frozen, watching their untouchable CEO reduced to just another federal prisoner. This is a mistake, Shane said, his voice strained but retaining vestiges of his usual authority. I have attorneys. I have rights. You can't simply— You have the right to remain silent, Agent Chen continued, her tone professionally neutral. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Cannot afford an attorney. The irony might have been amusing if Shane's entire existence wasn't imploding around him. By noon, footage was omnipresent. Shane Tackett, billionaire steel magnate, performing the perp walk in handcuffs while FBI agents removed boxes of evidence from his corner office. The man who'd once commanded boardrooms and influenced politicians now resembled exactly what he was, a criminal caught red-handed. Monica watched the coverage from her office at Goldwater, Blackstone and Associates, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. This was justice, but it was also the complete destruction of a man she'd once loved enough to sacrifice her career for. Mrs. Anderson? Timber Goldwater appeared in her doorway, his expression grim. Shane's lawyers are here. Monica wasn't surprised. Crenshaw, Blackstone and Mills was the kind of white-shoe law firm that specialized in keeping wealthy men out of prison. They'd represented senators, Supreme Court justices, and Fortune 500 CEOs. If anyone could save Shane from the consequences of his crimes, it would be them. But they hadn't counted on Monica Anderson. The conference room at the U.S. Attorney's office felt like a battlefield as Monica faced off against Shane's legal team. Lead counsel Marcus Crenshaw was a legend in legal circles, silver-haired, expensively dressed, with a reputation for making federal charges disappear through a combination of legal brilliance and political pressure. Ms. Anderson, Crenshaw's tone was carefully respectful. I have to say, this situation is unprecedented. A wife providing evidence to prosecute her own husband. Former wife, Monica corrected calmly, and a prosecutor providing evidence to prosecute a criminal. Shane's relationship to me doesn't grant him immunity from federal law. Crenshaw's smile was razor-thin. Of course not. But surely you understand that a jury will question your motives. A bitter divorce, a marriage ended in scandal, a woman seeking revenge against the man who disappointed her. Monica felt Timber tense beside her, but she remained perfectly calm. She'd expected this strategy: discredit the prosecutor, make it about emotion rather than evidence. Mr. Crenshaw, Monica's voice carried the authority that had once made her legendary. Are you suggesting that environmental terrorism becomes legal when the prosecutor happens to have once been married to the terrorist? I'm suggesting that your obvious personal animus toward my client calls into question. My obvious commitment to justice, Monica interrupted, calls into question why crimes of this magnitude weren't prosecuted years ago. But better late than never. Crenshaw leaned back, reassessing his opponent. He'd expected a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge. Instead, he was facing the legendary Monica Anderson, the prosecutor who'd never lost a case, whose reputation for legal brilliance was matched only by her reputation for absolute integrity. Ms. Anderson, Crenshaw tried a different approach. Surely we can reach some accommodation. Mr. Tackett is willing to pay substantial fines, implement compliance measures, even step down from day-to-day operations. Mr. Tackett, Monica's voice was ice, is willing to avoid federal prison. Unfortunately for him, environmental terrorism and international corruption aren't misdemeanors that can be resolved with fines and promises. You're talking about destroying a man's life over business decisions that are common practice in international commerce. Monica stood, her full height radiating authority. I'm talking about holding a man accountable for crimes that have destroyed ecosystems, violated human rights, and corrupted international commerce. If those crimes have destroyed his life, perhaps he should have considered that before he committed them. The room fell silent. Crenshaw's team exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that their usual strategies weren't working against this particular prosecutor. "There's something else you should know," Monica continued, her tone conversational but deadly. "The evidence against your client isn't limited to documentation I provided. Congressional investigators have uncovered additional crimes. International law enforcement has provided evidence of offshore corruption, and environmental groups have documented the human cost of your client's operations." Monica moved to the window overlooking the DC skyline, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Your client made the mistake of believing that wealth and connections made him untouchable. He's about to learn that justice doesn't recognize diplomatic immunity for billionaires." Crenshaw's composure cracked slightly. "Ms. Anderson, you're talking about a prosecution that could have international ramifications. The Chinese government has already threatened trade retaliation." "The Chinese government," Monica turned back to face him, "can threaten whatever they like. American law applies to American citizens, regardless of where they choose to commit their crimes or which foreign governments profit from those crimes." "You're being unreasonable. I'm being a prosecutor." Monica returned to her seat, her expression implacable. "Something I should have been 5 years ago instead of playing house with a criminal." The meeting ended with no resolution, which was exactly what Monica had expected. Shane's lawyers left with the understanding that they were facing not just a prosecutor, but a force of nature who had 5 years of anger and a lifetime of legal brilliance focused on destroying their client. That evening, Monica found herself in the unexpected position of receiving a call from Shane himself. He'd been released on a $10 million bond, pocket change for a billionaire, but the electronic ankle monitor would ensure he couldn't flee the country. "Monica," Shane's voice was strained, desperate. "We need to talk." "We have nothing to discuss, Shane. Anything you want to say can go through your lawyers." "Please, 5 years of marriage has to count for something. I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" Monica's laugh was bitter. "Shane, you committed 47 federal crimes. That's not making mistakes. That's being a career criminal who happened to own a tuxedo." "I gave you everything, Monica. The house, the lifestyle, the social position. You gave me a cage." Monica's voice was quiet but deadly. "You took one of the most respected prosecutors in America and turned her into a decoration for your dinner parties. You had a legal legend willing to be your partner, and you chose to make her your pet instead." Shane was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, more vulnerable than she'd heard it in years. "I didn't understand what I was doing to you. I thought you were happy. I was dying, Shane. Every day I spent pretending to be less intelligent, less capable, less everything than I actually was. I was dying a little more. And you never noticed because you never saw me as anything more than a beautiful accessory to your success." "I can change." "No." Monica's voice was final. "You can't change, Shane. You've had 5 years to see what you were doing to me, to our marriage, to the principles I'd spent my life defending. Instead, you got worse. More controlling, more dismissive, more certain that your wealth made you untouchable. Monica, please. The only thing I want from you now, Shane, is justice. And unlike our marriage, that's something I'm going to get." Monica hung up the phone and stood in her apartment, a modest two-bedroom place that was a far cry from the Potomac mansion, but felt more like home than anywhere she'd lived in 5 years. The next morning brought news that Shane's board of directors had voted unanimously to remove him as CEO and chairman of Tackett Industries. The company's stock price had crashed, major contracts were being canceled, and international partners were distancing themselves from the toxic brand. But the real blow came that afternoon, when Monica received a call from Dove Tackett, Shane's grandmother and the family matriarch. "Monica, dear," Dove's voice was tired but warm, "I owe you an apology." "Mrs. Tackett, you don't owe me anything." "I do, child. I watched you give up everything for my grandson, and I watched him waste the greatest gift he ever received. I should have spoken up. I should have told him what he was destroying." Monica felt tears threaten for the first time since the anniversary disaster. Dove Tackett had been the one member of Shane's family who'd truly welcomed her, who'd seen her potential and mourned her retreat from legal practice. "I failed you, Monica, and more than that, I failed to raise a grandson who could recognize a queen when he married one. Mrs. Tackett, Dove, dear, you'll always be family to me, regardless of what Shane has done." The older woman's voice grew stronger. "I want you to know that I've instructed my lawyers to cooperate fully with your investigation. If Shane committed crimes, he needs to face the consequences, even if those consequences include prison. Especially if they include prison. Perhaps some time behind bars will teach him what 5 years of marriage to a brilliant woman couldn't. That actions have consequences, and power without responsibility is just tyranny wearing an expensive suit." As Monica hung up the phone, she realized that Shane had lost more than his freedom, his company, and his reputation. He'd lost his family, his legacy, and any hope of redemption through wealth and influence. The Emperor truly had no clothes, and Monica Anderson had held the mirror that forced the world to see what he really was. A small, petty criminal who'd mistaken money for character and fear for respect. Tomorrow, the real trial would begin. Monica had never been more ready for a fight in her life. Chapter 7. From Predator to Prey. Rock bottom isn't losing everything. It's finally comprehending the magnitude of what you discarded. 6 months post-arrest, Shane Tackett occupied a studio apartment in Arlington, Virginia, staring at a television screen displaying his former wife addressing a joint congressional session. The apartment was a universe away from his Potomac mansion, 800 square feet of government-subsidized housing, the kind of place he'd once driven past without acknowledgement. His assets remained frozen pending trial. His company had been dissolved, its remaining value redistributed to environmental restoration funds and victim compensation. His friends had evaporated the moment handcuffs appeared, proving what Monica had always understood. They'd been business associates, never true companions. But worse than the poverty, worse than the isolation, worse than the ankle monitor that tracked his every movement, was watching Monica Anderson reclaim her throne as the most powerful legal mind in America. "Ms. Anderson," the committee chairman's voice carried across the Senate chamber, "your investigation into corporate environmental crimes has resulted in the largest recovery of damages in American history. Can you tell us about the international implications?" Monica stood at the witness table in a charcoal power suit, her bearing radiating the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her own brilliance. She looked magnificent, more alive, more vital, more herself than Shane had ever seen her during their marriage. "Senator Williams," Monica's voice carried clearly through the chamber, "the prosecution of Tackett Industries and its associated partners represents a fundamental shift in how America approaches corporate accountability. We've proven that wealth and political connections cannot shield executives from the consequences of environmental terrorism and human rights violations." Shane muted the television, unable to bear hearing more. But he couldn't stop watching as Monica commanded the attention of senators, Supreme Court justices, and international diplomats. This was the woman he'd dismissed as adequate. This was the woman he'd reduced to planning dinner parties and organizing charity events. This was the woman whose brilliance could have made them unstoppable partners if he'd been smart enough to recognize it. A knock at his door interrupted his self-pity. Shane opened it to find Brooks Tackett, his half-brother, holding a bag of groceries and wearing an expression of carefully controlled disgust. "Brooks." Shane stepped aside to let his brother enter. "I didn't expect to see you." Brooks Tackett was everything Shane had once been: successful, arrogant, certain of his place in the world. As the new CEO of what remained of the family's business interests, he'd spent months distancing himself from Shane's scandals. "I've been thinking about something," Brooks said, setting the groceries on Shane's tiny kitchen counter. "Do you remember when we were kids and Dad used to say that Tacketts never quit, never surrender, never show weakness?" "I remember." Shane's voice was hollow. "I've been wondering if that's why you could never see what you had with Monica. Because admitting her brilliance would have felt like admitting weakness in yourself." Shane sank into his single folding chair, one of only 3 pieces of furniture he could afford. "I don't need a psychology lecture, Brooks." "No, you need a reality check." Brooks turned to face his brother, his expression harsh. "Do you have any idea what Monica Anderson could have meant to our family, to our business, to your legacy? She was my wife. She was a legal genius who could have made us untouchable. Instead, you tried to turn her into a housewife because you couldn't handle being married to someone smarter than you." The words hit Shane like physical blows. He'd spent months telling himself that Monica had overreacted, that their marriage could have been saved, that she'd chosen career over love. But sitting in his government-subsidized apartment, watching his former wife reshape American law on national television, Shane was finally forced to confront the truth he'd been avoiding. He'd been married to greatness, and he'd tried to diminish it. "You want to know the worst part?" Brooks continued relentlessly. "I've been talking to people who knew Monica before you married her. Shane, she was already being mentioned for the Supreme Court at 33. The Supreme Court." Shane felt something crumble inside his chest. "That's not. She never told me." "Because you never asked. You were so busy being impressed with yourself that you never bothered to find out who you'd actually married." Brooks moved to Shane's window, looking out over the modest neighborhood that had become Shane's world. "Do you know what she's doing now, besides reshaping environmental law and prosecuting corporate criminals?" Shane shook his head, afraid to ask. "She's been offered a federal judgeship. The president wants to nominate her for the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. At 38, she'll be the youngest federal judge in 50 years, and everyone knows it's a stepping stone to the Supreme Court." The information felt like drowning. Shane had known Monica was brilliant, but he'd never understood the true scope of her potential. He'd seen her legal career as competition rather than partnership, threat rather than asset. "There's more," Brooks said quietly. "I've been doing some research into the Anderson family. Shane, do you have any idea who you married into?" Shane's silence was answer enough. "Her great-grandfather was Thaddeus Anderson, the Supreme Court Justice who wrote the majority opinion in Fletcher versus Environmental Protection Agency, the case that established federal environmental law. Her grandfather was Senator Marcus Anderson, who authored the Civil Rights Act's environmental justice provisions. Her father was Justice Thomas Anderson, who shaped constitutional law for 20 years. Brooks turned back to face Shane, his expression a mixture of pity and disgust. "Monica Anderson wasn't just a brilliant lawyer, Shane. She was legal royalty, American legal royalty. And you turned her into a party planner because you couldn't handle being married to someone from a family that had been shaping American law since before our great-grandfather sold his first ton of steel. Shane felt the last of his self-delusions crumble. He'd thought he was doing Monica a favor by marrying her, elevating her from a struggling lawyer to the wife of a billionaire. The truth was far more devastating. Monica Anderson had been slumming when she married him. "Why are you telling me this?" Shane asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because I want you to understand exactly what you threw away." Monica Anderson could have made the Tackett name synonymous with justice and power. Instead, you made it synonymous with environmental terrorism and corporate corruption. Brooks moved toward the door, then paused. "There's one more thing you should know. I've been in contact with Monica's legal team." Shane looked up sharply. "What?" "I'm cooperating with her prosecution of our international partners, providing evidence, testimony, whatever she needs to ensure that every executive involved in these crimes faces consequences." "Brooks, you can't." "I can, and I am. Because unlike you, I'm smart enough to recognize greatness when I see it. Monica Anderson is going to reshape corporate law in America, and I'd rather be on the right side of history than defend a criminal just because he shares my DNA." After Brooks left, Shane sat alone in his apartment, staring at the muted television where Monica continued her congressional testimony. For the first time in his life, he truly understood what he'd lost. He'd lost a woman who could have been his greatest asset and chosen to make her his greatest victim. He'd lost a partner who could have elevated him to heights he'd never imagined and chosen to reduce her to depths she didn't deserve. But more than that, he'd lost the chance to be part of something greater than himself. Monica's vision of justice, her commitment to protecting the environment and human rights, her brilliance that could have reshaped the world. He could have been her partner in all of it. Instead, he'd chosen to be her jailer. Shane's phone rang, a rare occurrence these days. The caller ID showed his lawyer's name. "Marcus," Shane answered. "Shane, we need to talk. The prosecution has offered a plea deal." "What kind of deal?" Marcus Crenshaw's voice was grim. 20 years in federal prison. You'd serve a minimum of 17 years with possibility of parole for good behavior. In exchange, you testify against your international partners and forfeit all remaining assets to environmental restoration funds. 20 years. Shane would be 65 when he was released. If he was released. An old man with no money, no reputation, no legacy except the crimes that had destroyed everything he'd built. "What happens if I don't take the deal?" Shane asked. "Monica's case is airtight, Shane. If this goes to trial, you're looking at life in prison. The evidence is overwhelming, the international attention is enormous, and the jury is going to see you as the poster child for corporate irresponsibility." Shane closed his eyes, thinking of Monica's words from their last conversation. "The only thing I want from you now is justice." She was going to get it. "I need time to think," Shane said. "You have 48 hours. After that, the deal is off the table." As Shane hung up the phone, he looked back at the television where Monica was concluding her testimony. The camera caught her face in profile, showing the strength and intelligence that had first attracted him years ago in that boardroom confrontation. She looked like a queen addressing her subjects. She looked like justice personified. She looked like everything Shane had been too small and too threatened to appreciate when he'd had the chance. The boy who'd been raised to believe that Tackett's never quit, never surrender, never show weakness was finally ready to admit the truth. Monica Anderson had always been too good for him. He'd just been too arrogant to see it. Now, sitting in his government apartment, facing 20 years in prison, watching the woman he'd destroyed rise to heights he could never have imagined, Shane Tackett finally understood the difference between power and greatness. Monica had always possessed both. He'd only ever had the illusion of the first. Chapter 8. The Valley of Dry Bones. Redemption begins when you stop crafting excuses and start making amends. even when forgiveness seems impossible. The construction site at dawn was a symphony of grinding engines and shouting voices, the kind of honest noise Shane Tackett had forgotten existed during his years in climate-controlled boardrooms. His hands, once softened by decades of desk work, were now calloused and scarred from 3 months of manual labor. The orange hard hat felt foreign on his head, but not as foreign as the name tag reading Shane T. General Labor. 6 months earlier, Shane would have arrived at his office in a chauffeur-driven Mercedes, preparing to make decisions affecting thousands of jobs and millions of dollars. Now he mixed concrete and hauled steel beams for $12 hourly, the only employment available to a former billionaire awaiting trial for federal crimes. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was working construction on the new Environmental Protection Agency headquarters, a building that would house the department actively prosecuting him. "Tackett," the foreman's voice cut through the morning noise. "You're needed on the foundation crew. Building inspectors coming today." Shane nodded and headed toward the foundation site, where workers were preparing the concrete that would support the building's massive structure. As he worked, he couldn't help but think about foundations, how his entire life had been built on corruption and environmental destruction, while Monica's had been built on justice and integrity. The building inspector turned out to be a young woman in her 30s, precise and professional as she examined the construction specifications. Shane kept his head down, hoping she wouldn't recognize him, but luck wasn't on his side. "Excuse me," she said, approaching him during a water break. "Aren't you Shane Tackett?" Shane braced himself for disgust, recognition, maybe even fear. Instead, the woman's expression held only curiosity. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm Inspector Sarah Martinez. I just wanted to say thank you." Shane looked up, confused. "Thank you. My family lives near one of your old steel plants in Ohio. The environmental cleanup funded by your asset forfeiture. It's the first time in 50 years that my kids can play in the river without worrying about chemical contamination." Shane felt something twist in his chest. I'm glad they're safe. The thing is," Martinez continued, "a lot of people are calling you a monster. But I keep thinking about what your ex-wife said in her testimony, that environmental crimes have victims, and justice means making those victims whole." She gestured toward the EPA building rising around them. "This building exists because of the cleanup funds from your prosecution. The environmental restoration your case funded will help millions of people. So, thank you for finally facing the consequences." As Martinez walked away, Shane stood frozen, holding his water bottle with trembling hands. He'd spent months focused on his own suffering, the loss of wealth, status, freedom. He'd never thought about the victims of his crimes, the children who could now play safely in rivers his plants had poisoned. That evening, Shane returned to his studio apartment to find an envelope slipped under his door. No return address, but he recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a newspaper clipping, the Washington Post article about Monica's confirmation hearing for her federal judgeship. The accompanying photo showed her at the witness table, fielding questions from senators with the poise and brilliance that had once made Shane fall in love with her. Attached was a handwritten note in Monica's precise script. "Shane, I thought you should see what justice looks like when it's not corrupted by greed and ego. This is who I always was. You just chose not to see it. Master of Arts." Shane sank into his folding chair, studying the photograph. Monica looked radiant, not just beautiful, but alive in a way she'd never been during their marriage. This was Monica Anderson, federal judge, environmental law expert, the woman who was reshaping American justice one case at a time. This was the woman he'd tried to turn into a housewife. Shane's laptop, a second-hand model he'd bought with his construction wages, sat on his tiny kitchen table. For the first time in months, he opened it and began to research his former wife's career. What he found destroyed his last illusions about their marriage. Harvard Law Review, youngest editor in the publication's history. Supreme Court clerkship with Justice Brennan. First woman to win the Environmental Law Society's Lifetime Achievement Award before age 30. Congressional testimony that had shaped 3 major environmental protection acts. Monica hadn't been a struggling lawyer when she met him. She'd been a rising star in the legal world, already being mentioned for federal judgeships, already recognized as one of the most brilliant legal minds of her generation. And she'd given it all up to support his dreams. Shane found video of her final case before their marriage, prosecuting the CEO of Meridian Chemical for environmental crimes. Watching Monica in action was like watching a master artist at work. Her questioning was surgical, her arguments unassailable, her presence commanding. The defendant broke down and confessed to crimes he'd been denying for years. This was the woman Shane had called adequate. The research led him deeper into the Anderson family history. 4 generations of legal brilliance, Supreme Court justices and senators, a family that had shaped American law since the Civil War. Monica hadn't just married down when she chose Shane. She'd married so far down it was like a duchess choosing to marry a stable boy. But unlike fairy tales, this particular stable boy had been too threatened by his princess's crown to appreciate her choosing to wear his ring instead. Shane's phone rang, interrupting his research. The caller ID showed his grandmother's number. "Grandmother Dove?" Shane answered, surprised. They hadn't spoken since his arrest. "Shane, dear." Dove Tackett's voice was tired but warm. "I've been thinking about you. I'm surprised you want anything to do with me. You're my grandson. That doesn't change because you made terrible choices." Dove paused. "I called because I wanted you to know that I had dinner with Monica last week." Shane's chest tightened. "You did?" "She comes by once a month, brings groceries, checks on my medications, sits and talks about books and law and justice. She's been taking care of me better than you ever did, even after everything that's happened." Shane felt shame wash over him in waves. Of course Monica was taking care of his grandmother. Of course she was showing the kind of loyalty and decency that he'd never appreciated. "Shane," Dove's voice grew serious, "I need to tell you something. Monica asked me about your childhood, about why you became so controlling. What did you tell her? The truth. About your father's rages, about how he treated your mother before she left. About how he taught you that showing weakness was the greatest sin a Tackett could commit." Shane closed his eyes, remembering his father's lessons about power and control, about never letting anyone see vulnerability or doubt. "I told Monica that your father raised you to believe that love was possession, that partnership meant dominance. But Shane, that's not love. That's tyranny." "I know that now," Shane whispered. "Do you? Because Monica asked me something that broke my heart. She asked if you'd ever, even once, told her you were proud of her intelligence, proud of her accomplishments, proud to be married to someone so brilliant and accomplished." Shane tried to speak but found his throat closed with emotion. "I couldn't answer her, Shane, because in 5 years of marriage I never heard you express pride in who Monica was, only in how she made you look." The phone was silent for a long moment. When Dove spoke again, her voice carried decades of regret. "Your grandfather was like that with me, always trying to diminish me to make himself feel bigger. I promised myself I wouldn't let the family continue that pattern, but I failed with your father and he failed with you. Grandmother, Monica broke that pattern, Shane. She chose to be your partner instead of your victim. And you threw it away because you were too much your father's son to recognize the gift you'd been given." After the call ended, Shane sat in the growing darkness of his apartment, thinking about patterns and choices, about the difference between inheriting weakness and choosing strength. He thought about Monica, visiting his grandmother and showing kindness to the family of the man who'd destroyed her career and betrayed her trust. He thought about her testimony before Congress, her confirmation as a federal judge, her transformation back into the legal force of nature she'd always been meant to be. Most of all, he thought about Inspector Martinez's words. Justice means making victims whole. Shane had spent his life making victims, poisoning rivers, exploiting workers, corrupting politicians. Monica had spent hers protecting victims, defending the environment, prosecuting criminals, upholding justice. They'd been opposites from the beginning. She just loved him enough to pretend otherwise. Shane opened his laptop again and began typing. Not research this time, but a letter. A real letter, handwritten words that he'd been too proud and too blind to say when they might have mattered. Dear Monica, I know you don't want to hear from me. I know I lost the right to your attention when I chose greed over integrity, control over partnership, ego over love. But I need you to know that I finally understand what I threw away. Not just your love, though losing that breaks my heart every day. I threw away the chance to be worthy of someone magnificent. You were never the problem in our marriage. You were the solution I was too threatened to accept. I'm taking the plea deal. 20 years in federal prison. It's not enough for what I've done, but it's a start. And when I get out, if I get out, I'm going to spend whatever life I have left trying to undo some of the damage I've caused. Not because I expect forgiveness. I don't deserve forgiveness. But because you taught me that justice means making victims whole, and I have a lot of victims to answer to. Thank you for showing me what greatness looks like. Thank you for 5 years of trying to love me into being better than I was, and thank you for finally doing what I never could, choosing justice over comfort. You were always too good for me, Monica. I just wish I'd been smart enough to try to become worthy of you instead of trying to make you small enough for me. With all the respect and admiration I should have shown you every day of our marriage. Shane. Shane sealed the letter and walked to the mailbox in the cold night air. As he dropped it in, he felt something shift inside him, not hope for reconciliation, because that was impossible, but something simpler and more important. For the first time in his life, Shane Tackett chose to do the right thing, not because it benefited him, but because it was right. It was the beginning of becoming the man Monica had always believed he could be. 20 years too late, but still a beginning. Chapter 9. The Final Gambit. The measure of a soul isn't how far it falls, but whether it finds courage to rise when rising serves no purpose except redemption. The federal district courthouse stood like a monument to justice in Washington's heart, its granite pillars reflecting the weight of law and consequence. Shane Tackett climbed the courthouse steps for his final time as a free man, knowing that within hours he would be sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. But that wasn't what made his hands tremble as he passed through metal detectors. Monica would be present. For 8 months she'd been a phantom in his existence, a brilliant force reshaping American law while he learned to mix concrete and question every choice he'd ever made. He'd seen her on television, read about her judicial confirmation, heard whispers of her courtroom victories. But he hadn't encountered her face to face since the night she'd walked out of their anniversary party and into legal legend. Today she would be there to watch justice finally served. Shane's court-appointed attorney, David Kim, met him in the hallway outside the courtroom. Kim was young, earnest, and completely outmatched by the magnitude of the case, but he'd done his best with an impossible situation. "Shane," Kim's voice was quiet, "are you ready for this? As ready as someone can be for the end of their life. It's not the end. 20 years is a long time, but—" "David." Shane's voice was calm, almost peaceful. My life ended the night I called my wife adequate and told her I hated her. Everything since then has just been consequences. Kim studied his client's face, noting the changes that 8 months of poverty and honest work had wrought. Shane Tackett looked older, humbler, somehow more real than the polished businessman who'd first walked into his office. "There's something you should know," Kim said quietly. "Judge Anderson recused herself from your case." Shane looked up sharply. "Monica's not presiding. Conflict of interest, but she'll be in the gallery. The press is calling it the legal story of the decade, the prosecutor who brought down her own husband watching his sentencing." Shane nodded, his throat tight. Of course, Monica would maintain perfect ethical standards. Of course, she wouldn't let their personal history compromise justice. "There's something else," Kim continued. "Wisteria Moonridge was arrested this morning." Shane felt the world tilt. What? Financial fraud, corruption charges. Apparently, she's been embezzling from multiple clients, including bribing foreign officials to secure contracts for American companies. The FBI has been investigating her for months. Shane's mind raced. Wisteria had been his strategic communications consultant, the woman who'd poisoned his relationship with Monica, who'd convinced him that his wife was disloyal and ambitious. She played you, Shane, fed you paranoia about Monica while setting up her own criminal enterprise. Monica's team uncovered it during their investigation into your international partners. Even in destroying him, Monica had been protecting him from worse destruction. The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal scholars, environmental activists, and Washington's political elite. Shane recognized senators, Supreme Court justices, and federal prosecutors who'd come to witness what many were calling the most significant corporate prosecution of the century. But his eyes found Monica immediately. She sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing a navy suit that reminded him painfully of the one she'd worn the day they met. Her dark hair was pulled back in the severe chignon of her prosecutorial days, and her posture radiated the quiet confidence of someone who'd never doubted her own integrity. She looked magnificent. She looked like justice personified. She looked like everything Shane had been too small to appreciate when he'd had the chance. Judge Patricia Morrison called the court to order, and Shane stood to face his sentencing. The weight of 8 months of reflection, research, and revelation pressed down on him as he listened to the charges being read. 47 counts of environmental terrorism, international corruption, racketeering, and conspiracy to violate federal law. Each charge was a reminder of Monica's brilliance, of her patient documentation of his crimes, of her commitment to justice even when it meant destroying the man she'd once loved. "Mr. Tackett," Judge Morrison's voice cut through his thoughts, "you have entered a guilty plea to all charges. Do you understand the consequences of this plea?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Is there anything you wish to say before sentencing?" Shane had prepared a speech with his lawyer, expressions of remorse, promises of rehabilitation, pleas for leniency. But standing in that courtroom, looking at Monica's face for the first time in 8 months, all the prepared words seemed inadequate. "Your Honor," Shane's voice carried clearly through the silent courtroom, "I want to address my crimes not as someone seeking leniency, but as someone who finally understands the full scope of what I've done." He turned slightly, addressing not just the judge but the packed gallery, the reporters, the environmental activists who'd fought against his companies for years. "For 2 decades, I built an empire on environmental destruction and human suffering. I told myself it was business, that it was necessary, that the damage was acceptable in service of progress and profit." Shane's voice grew stronger, more certain. "I was wrong. The children who couldn't play safely in rivers my plants poisoned. They deserved better. The workers who suffered in unsafe conditions because I cut corners to increase profits. They deserved better. The communities destroyed by environmental disasters I could have prevented. They deserved better. He paused, gathering courage for what he needed to say next. But I want to address one specific victim of my crimes, someone who suffered not from my environmental destruction, but from something worse, my complete failure to recognize and honor the extraordinary person I was privileged to marry. A murmur ran through the courtroom. This wasn't typical sentencing hearing testimony. Monica Anderson is the most brilliant legal mind of our generation. She's a woman who could have reshaped American law, could have sat on the Supreme Court, could have been a force for justice and environmental protection that would have changed the world. Shane's voice caught slightly, but he continued. Instead, she chose to love me. She sacrificed her career, her ambitions, her calling to support mine. And I repaid that sacrifice by trying to diminish her, by dismissing her intelligence, by treating her like an ornament rather than a partner. Now Shane turned directly toward Monica, meeting her eyes for the first time in 8 months. Monica, I know you don't want my apologies. You've made it clear that the only thing you want from me is justice. You're going to get it. 20 years in federal prison isn't enough for what I've done, but it's a start. Monica's expression was unreadable, but Shane thought he saw something flicker in her dark eyes. But I need to say this, not for forgiveness. I don't deserve that, but for truth. You were never the problem in our marriage. You were the solution I was too threatened to accept. You were offering me a partnership that could have changed the world, and I chose dominance over collaboration, ego over love. Shane's voice grew stronger, more passionate. Your Honor, the prosecution in this case was led by one of the most brilliant legal minds in American history. Monica Anderson didn't just build an airtight case against me. She did it while maintaining absolute ethical standards, perfect legal procedure, and unwavering commitment to justice over personal vindication. He turned back to Judge Morrison. I'm not asking for leniency, Your Honor. I'm asking that this court recognize what I failed to recognize during 5 years of marriage. Monica Anderson represents the very best of American justice. Brilliant, ethical, uncompromising in her commitment to protecting the innocent and holding the powerful accountable. Shane's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but in the silent courtroom every word carried clearly. She deserves to be on the Supreme Court, Your Honor. She deserves to shape American law for the next 30 years. She deserves to be remembered not as the woman who prosecuted her husband, but as the legal legend who proved that justice applies to everyone, regardless of wealth, power, or personal connections. Judge Morrison was quiet for several long moments. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 30 years on the federal bench. Mr. Tackett, it's rare to hear a defendant speak with such understanding of both their crimes and their victims. The court sentences you to 20 years in federal prison with eligibility for parole after 17 years contingent on continued cooperation with environmental restoration efforts. The gavel fell with finality, but Shane barely heard it. His eyes were fixed on Monica, who was looking directly at him for the first time since he'd begun speaking. For just a moment, he saw something in her expression that looked almost like, not forgiveness, but perhaps recognition. Recognition that the man who'd just spoken was finally the man she'd always believed he could become. As federal marshals approached to take him into custody, Shane mouthed 2 words toward Monica. Thank you. Thank you for showing him what justice looked like. Thank you for proving that some things mattered more than comfort or convenience. Thank you for choosing truth over loyalty, principle over partnership. Thank you for being strong enough to love him and wise enough to leave him. As the handcuffs clicked shut, Shane Tackett felt something he hadn't experienced in 45 years of life. The strange peace that comes from finally telling the truth about yourself, regardless of the consequences. Monica Anderson watched him being led away, and for the first time in 8 months, she allowed herself to remember why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. Not because of his wealth or charm or power, but because she'd glimpsed, for just a moment, the man who'd finally found the courage to stand up in federal court and speak the truth about justice, accountability, and the woman he'd failed to deserve. It had taken the destruction of his empire and the loss of his freedom, but Shane Tackett had finally become the man Monica Anderson had always believed he could be. 20 years too late for their marriage, but perhaps just in time for his soul. Chapter 10. Crowned in Fire. True love isn't discovering someone perfect. It's finding someone willing to become worthy of the perfection they've been offered. 3 years after Shane Tackett vanished behind federal prison walls, Monica Anderson stood at the Rose Garden podium as the President of the United States prepared to announce her Supreme Court nomination. At 41, she would be the youngest justice appointed in over a century, and the first environmental law expert to serve on the nation's highest court. Morning sunlight caught highlights in her hair as she surveyed the assembled crowd of senators, Supreme Court justices, legal scholars, and environmental activists gathered to witness this historic moment. Monica wore an emerald green suit, the color of justice, of growth, of the environmental protection that had defined her career. She appeared every inch a queen ascending to her rightful throne. Ladies and gentlemen, President Harrison's voice carried across the Rose Garden. It is my honor to nominate to the Supreme Court of the United States a legal mind whose brilliance has reshaped American environmental law, whose integrity has never been questioned, and whose commitment to justice has made her the most respected prosecutor of her generation. Monica felt a familiar surge of satisfaction as the president outlined her accomplishments. The corporate prosecutions that had saved entire ecosystems, the legal precedents that had strengthened environmental protection, the judicial decisions that had put human rights above corporate profits. This was her moment, the culmination of a career built on principle, integrity, and unwavering commitment to justice. Justice designate Monica Anderson, President Harrison concluded, represents the very best of American jurisprudence. The applause was thunderous, but Monica barely heard it, because standing at the back of the crowd, wearing the simple gray suit of a man who'd traded custom tailoring for humility, was Shane Tackett. He'd been released 6 months early for good behavior and his work establishing environmental restoration programs in federal prison. Monica had known of his release. She made it her business to know such things, but she'd assumed he'd disappeared into anonymity somewhere far from Washington. Instead, he was here, watching her greatest triumph with an expression of such pure pride and admiration that it took her breath away. After the ceremony, as Monica accepted congratulations from senators and Supreme Court justices, she kept glancing toward where Shane had been standing, but he'd vanished into the dispersing crowd, leaving her with questions she'd thought she'd put to rest 3 years ago. The answers came that evening in the form of a hand-delivered letter, waiting at her Georgetown townhouse. Monica, I know I have no right to intrude on your moment of triumph, but I couldn't let this day pass without witnessing the culmination of everything you were always meant to become. I've spent 3 years in prison learning who I really am when stripped of wealth, power, and ego. I've worked in the prison library, earned my bachelor's degree, and started a master's program in environmental science. I've taught literacy classes to other inmates and helped establish a victim impact program that's being implemented in federal prisons nationwide. None of that erases my crimes or makes me worthy of your forgiveness, but it's made me worthy of the truth. I love you, Monica. Not the woman I tried to diminish during our marriage, but the brilliant, powerful, magnificent force of nature you've always been. I love your intelligence that intimidated me, Your principles that shamed me, your strength that could have elevated me if I'd been wise enough to embrace it instead of trying to contain it. I'm not asking for another chance. I'm asking for the opportunity to spend the rest of my life proving that I finally understand what I threw away and that I'm grateful, so fucking grateful, that you were strong enough to save yourself when I was too weak to save either of us. If you never want to see me again, I'll understand. But if you're willing to let me earn the privilege of loving you the way you deserve to be loved, as an equal, as a partner, as the brilliant woman who should have been ruling the world instead of planning my dinner parties, then I'll be at the Jefferson Memorial tomorrow at sunset, waiting for a queen to decide if a reformed peasant might be worthy of serving in her court. With all the love and respect I should have shown you every day of our marriage, Shane. P.S. Congratulations on the Supreme Court nomination. The country is lucky to have you. I was just too stupid to realize how lucky I was. Monica read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling slightly as Shane's words sank in. For 3 years, she'd told herself she was completely over him, that their marriage had been a mistake she'd corrected through divorce and prosecution. But sitting in her elegant townhouse, surrounded by the trappings of her successful career, Monica had to confront a truth she'd been avoiding. She'd never stopped loving Shane Tackett. Not the arrogant, controlling businessman who'd tried to diminish her, but the man she'd glimpsed in their early courtship, the one who'd been curious about her mind, who'd listened to her ideas, who'd seemed to see her as a partner rather than a possession. The man who'd finally found the courage to speak truth in that federal courtroom. The Jefferson Memorial at sunset was magnificent, its neoclassical columns reflected in the tidal basin as the D.C. skyline glowed in the dying light. Monica found Shane sitting on the steps, staring out over the water with the patience of a man who'd learned to measure time in years rather than minutes. He looked different. Thinner, yes, but stronger somehow. The softness of wealth had been replaced by the lean muscle of honest work. His hair had more silver, his face more lines, but his eyes held something she'd never seen before. Peace. "You came," Shane said simply, standing as she approached. "I almost didn't." Monica stopped several feet away, maintaining the distance that 3 years of separation had created between them. "I've spent 3 years convincing myself that what we had was a mistake." "It was a mistake," Shane said quietly. "My mistake. Every day of it." Monica studied his face, looking for traces of the man who'd called her adequate, who'd dismissed her brilliance, who'd tried to make her small enough to fit his vision of what a wife should be. Instead, she saw something that made her pulse quicken, despite every rational thought in her head. She saw a man who was looking at her like she was the most magnificent thing he'd ever seen. "I read about your work in prison," Monica said. "The environmental programs, the literacy classes, the victim impact work. I had a lot of time to think about the damage I'd done to the environment, to communities, to you." Shane's voice was steady, honest. "I couldn't undo my crimes, but I could try to understand them, and I could work to make sure other people didn't make the same mistakes. Is that what our marriage was? A mistake?" Shane was quiet for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 years of reflection. "Our marriage was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too threatened by it to see that. You offered me partnership with one of the most brilliant minds of our generation, and I chose dominance over collaboration. You offered me love that could have elevated both of us, and I chose control over connection." Shane turned to face her fully, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that reminded her of their first meeting in that boardroom so many years ago. "Monica, I spent 5 years trying to make you smaller so I could feel bigger. I spent 3 years in prison learning that real power comes from elevating the people you love, not diminishing them. And what makes you think you've changed?" Monica's voice was steady, but Shane could hear the vulnerability underneath. What makes you think you won't try to control me again the moment things get difficult? Shane smiled, not the arrogant, controlling smile of his business days, but something warmer, more genuine. Because I've learned the difference between loving someone and trying to own them. Because I've finally understood that you were never mine to control. You were a gift I was privileged to receive. Shane stepped closer, close enough that Monica could smell his cologne. Not the expensive designer scent of his billionaire days, but something simpler, more honest. Monica, you're going to be confirmed to the Supreme Court next month. You're going to spend the next 30 years shaping American law, protecting the environment, defending justice. You're going to be one of the most powerful people in the country. And I want to spend those 30 years being worthy of loving someone that magnificent. Not as your equal. I'll never be your equal. But as someone who finally understands that supporting your greatness is the highest privilege a man could ask for. Monica felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. For 3 years, she'd been the woman who'd brought down her own husband in the name of justice. She'd been strong, independent, uncompromising. But looking at Shane's face in the growing darkness, seeing the genuine transformation that 3 years of honest reflection had wrought, Monica allowed herself to remember something she'd forgotten. She'd married him because she'd believed he could become this man. I can't be your trophy wife again, Shane, Monica said quietly. I won't sacrifice my career or my principles or my power for anyone's comfort. I would never ask you to. Shane's voice was fierce with conviction. Monica, I want to be the husband of Supreme Court Justice Anderson. I want to be the man who supports your career, who celebrates your victories, who knows that he's the luckiest bastard in America because he gets to go home to greatness every night. Shane reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box. Monica's breath caught as he dropped to one knee on the steps of the Jefferson Memorial. Monica Anderson, Shane's voice carried across the water. Will you marry me again? Not as the woman I tried to make you, but as the woman you've always been. Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that I finally understand the difference between loving someone and trying to contain them? Monica looked down at the man who'd once tried to diminish her brilliance, who'd called her adequate, who'd broken her heart with his inability to see her worth. But she also saw the man who'd found the courage to confess his crimes in federal court, who'd spent 3 years learning humility and redemption, who was now kneeling before her like a knight, pledging fealty to his queen. Stand up, Shane, Monica said softly. Shane rose, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. If we do this, Monica's voice carried the authority that had made her legendary in courtrooms across America. It will be on my terms. I will be confirmed to the Supreme Court. I will shape American law for the next 3 decades. I will be one of the most powerful people in this country. I'm counting on it, Shane said, his voice rough with emotion. And you will support that power, celebrate it, and never, ever try to diminish it again. It would be my honor to serve in your court, Justice Anderson. Monica smiled then, the first real smile Shane had seen from her in 3 years. It was the smile of a woman who'd finally found a man worthy of her crown. Then yes, Shane Tackett, I'll marry you again. But this time you're marrying the real me. When Shane kissed her, it was with the passion of a man who'd spent 3 years learning the value of what he'd thrown away, and the reverence of someone who finally understood that he was touching greatness. As they stood together in the shadow of the Jefferson Memorial, Monica whispered against his lips the words that would define their new beginning. Welcome to my reign, Shane. Try to keep up. The end. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding your other half. They're about finding someone brave enough to become worthy of your wholeness.